Hey y'all, coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida. This is GovLove, a podcast about local government brought to you by engaging local government leaders. I'm Ben Kittelson, Senior Consultant at RefTelis and GovLove co-host. We've got a great episode for you today. We're going to be talking urbanism with a side of dad. But first, the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGO member. Engaging local government leaders is a professional association engaging the brightest minds in local government. And the best way, once again, your ELGO membership supports this podcast. So if you want to support us, that's the best way to do it. Now, let me introduce today's guest. Greene Jr. is an urbanist hailing from one of America's oldest cities, Richmond, Virginia. He shares his love for city planning as a family urbanism columnist on his Substack, Density Dad. He's also a Transportation Justice Fellow for the National Association of City Transportation Officials. He's an advocate for higher density, public transportation, and safe bike infrastructure. So with that, Barry, welcome to GovLove. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I'm excited to nerd out and then also and just talk dad to dad, you know? So
yeah, absolutely.
We have a tradition on the podcast to start with a lightning round to get let our guests warm up a little and let our listeners get to know you a little bit. So my first question for you, what was the first album that you bought?
First album, Jay-Z Blueprint 2 with my own money. I distinctly remember that.
Nice. Was that cassette, CD we talking? Or?
That was CD. Yeah.
Nice.
So it was actually a double disc CD. So that was pretty cool.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, and then the next line of question for you. What book are you currently reading?
Oh, A Walk by Jonathan Stalls. It's just such a great read. It just talks a lot about his journey on, navigating life via just stepping outside and enjoying the outdoors. And a lot of people probably follow him if you're in the urbanism community, Pedestrian Indignity. So he wrote a book and it's amazing.
Cool. Awesome. I haven't heard of that one, so I'll have to add it to my list. Cool. And then what was the last thing, movie, TV show that you watched?
Hijack. That was easy.
Oh yeah. That's the one with gosh, what's his face?
Yeah, Idris
Not Stringer
Elba.
Bell. The Idris
Yeah, yes. Everyone wants to say Stringer Bell, but Idris. Amazing show on Apple TV.
Okay, cool. You're not the first person that's recommended that to me, so I'm gonna have to.
It's good.
I'm gonna have to do a little binge. All right, then my last line of question for you: Where do you go for inspiration?
Ooh, I would say YouTube. Like I'm just always on it, like watching something about something, right? Like it's a world out there for it. Yeah. So YouTube.
Any channels in particular, or just like you're surfing?
Absolutely. City Nerd, Ray, and City Beautiful, Active Towns. I mean, I could go on about a lot of what I'm watching. Marcus Brownlee and MKBHD. Gotta get a little tech in there.
Yeah. Awesome. Very cool. Well, I'm always curious how people, a lot of our guests work for local governments. I like talking about how they get into that career, but for you, kind of working in transportation, urbanism, being kind of writing about these topics, like how did you end up in this field, and kind of how did you end up doing, some of this work?
Yeah, so I started out just again watching a lot of these videos on YouTube, and things started to kind of click for me. Comparing my life when I didn't have a car compared to like when I had a car. I had just left Brooklyn, New York, and I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, and there was just such a difference in getting around town, and I started to realize why. Sprawl, that makes sense. Like I never knew why I wanted to be in like walkable areas until I started watching the videos and like really dissecting the benefits. And so like coming from, a city that literally it's so many ways to get around to a city where you just have like one or two ways to get around unless you live in certain areas, made me just want to take a deeper dive into it. And then I opened up my first business in a walkable neighborhood, and I saw the benefits of people saying, yeah, I walked here. It's in the neighborhood. And then I lived in that same neighborhood, and I was able to enjoy the benefits of getting around. And my wife and I just, our first couple years married, just was able to explore by foot. And that was like great, during the pandemic. So, I think just wanting to learn more about the professional side, like the policy side, like not just, oh, I want to walk to things, but like how we get there.
Yeah.
What is density? Like, learning those terms. I took a civic leadership academy course with the city of Charlotte, and after graduating, that course just opened up my eyes to the decision makers, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
from Parks and
Mm-hmm.
Rec to um, tourism, and all the different aspects, fire department and police department. They just would have different departments of the city of Charlotte speak with us. And after leaving that, I felt like an advocate for, my area, but then also
Yeah.
like understanding truly like who I could call on and how to be a part of public meetings and how to just stay informed. So I think a collage of all of these things just got me really involved.
Mm.
And I don't think there's a better time to jump in.
Yeah. Yeah, but then you moved back to Richmond, right? So had did you how did you get plugged into the? I assume you worked to try and get plugged into the same sort of network of like what's the local government, or what are those like contacts and all that. So
Yes.
like what was that like trying to do that again in a new place?
Yeah. So like what I loved about um what do we call it now? I guess X or Twitter.
Yeah, X.
Just the community that was built upon urbanism.
Hmm.
Um it's like you just started to see people with great ideas just sharing, and it didn't matter like where they were from. And naturally being from Richmond and following certain people, it's like I started to get like plugged in into the network rather easily.
Mm.
And then I've always been very, I don't want to say research friendly, but I like to deep dive into cities I think that are cool. Like who's the, playmakers, who's, involved. And I just started going down a rabbit hole here in Richmond and following, greats like Wyatt Gordon, writing for Gigi Wash and just following a lot of what's being done here. And I was like, wow, this is my hometown. Like,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
living in Charlotte and I'm like seeing all the cool things happening here.
Yeah.
And naturally it was at the same time of having my first child. So I was like, what do we do? We're
Mm.
living in the outskirts of Charlotte and we're trying to figure out like what the next 5 years look like for us. And my dad's side of my family is still here. So it's like, well, maybe we move here and just be involved, but then also give her an opportunity to see Richmond very differently than I did.
Mm.
And I think once we, got set in place, it was like a no brainer. I was like, I felt
Yeah.
right at home. And that sounds so touche, right? It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it is your hometown. You should
Yeah.
feel at home. But like I didn't feel like I had to like relearn a city, but I did get to unlearn what I thought about my city.
Interesting. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the things that people say, like, oh, there's nowhere to eat here, or like, there's never any parking, like all the things that you think about of like your
Yeah.
hometown that, people have been there their whole lives say about it. It's like I got to unravel those things. Like, oh, there's plenty of places to eat when you go by foot,
Yeah.
and you like discover it compared to flying by it in the car. So it's like just being able to unlearn those things and then like actually refill that void with the good about Richmond.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, very cool. And I want we'll have to spend most of our time talking about your Substack and some of the writing you do. But since I saw that you were a transportation justice fellow for NACTO, um, can you just talk a little bit about that? Like, what does that fellowship entail? What are some of the things you do or you work on as part of that?
Absolutely. So we just graduated um, last month, and it was um, a very emotional
Hmm.
setting simply because the work that NACTO has done with this transportation justice fellowship has allowed, you know, BIPOC advocates to be seen
Cool.
in a way that isn't necessarily done on that scale at that level. So, this course that I think started in maybe December of last year, so almost 9 months, give or so, give or take once a month, being able to get together and just be very vulnerable about
Mm,
what it's like to be, a BIPOC advocate, to
mm,
have to be at like every meeting to speak up for, you know, the unspoken,
yeah.
and like having to Be the one in your group that is tapped in, and like you say something about it, and like it's not just something you can mention, and you have to like really explain it.
Mm.
It's like to be able to share what it's like to get a job in this field, in this sector, and um wrapping up on it. And it's changed me forever.
Yeah.
It gave me the opportunity to write for Better Bike Share and People for Bikes. I had my first like quote unquote national piece and get
Yeah.
that visibility. And now to be able to be with write for Streets Blog USA and Fatherly, like I wouldn't have been able to do that without this program. And so yeah, it's just well, yeah,
Yeah.
just thinking about all the good things that I was able to take with it. I have friendships that I can, you know, we can meet up and ask ideas and, share ideas and get feedback and those type of things. But then also like to be able to be in the room of designing cities,
Yeah.
was a big deal. And to not just be there, but to be there as fellows,
Mm.
that was just a different interaction. To be able to present there and speak about Richmond as my project, or to go to, the Congress for New Urbanism conference shortly after in Strongtown's national gathering, and
Yeah.
people recognize me from the design of cities. I was like, I
Yeah.
felt in, I
Cool.
felt
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
one of the cool kids, right? And I
Yeah.
was like, that's what it's really about. It's like that visibility. You can't put a price on that, and I'm just so thankful for the opportunity with NACTO.
That's awesome. Yeah. Very cool. And I assume it's like other folks kind of across the country doing similar like advocacy work, or is it a mix of people
Absolutely,
that work for
it's
cities? Like, yeah,
yeah. So across the United States, so we had people out of Durham, North Carolina, and Seattle and Cincinnati and
cool.
Baltimore. So just, different cities. And what I loved is just wasn't the big cities, right? Like
Yeah,
I'm from Richmond,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
and so yeah, it just that to get that visibility on those smaller cities, I thought also mattered.
yeah. No, I mean that's yeah. So we'll link to that program just so if for folks that are interested, they can learn more and kind of see some of the folks in your cohort as well. That
Absolutely.
seems like a cool program. Um, that's awesome. Well, that leads nicely to kind of your writing. Because so for our listeners, I recently became a dad as well, and so I think your
Congrats.
work, thank you, your work like really resonated because I live in a walkable area of Jacksonville. I walk and bike, around the neighborhood a lot and run a lot. And it's one thing to experience, yourself moving around your place and your city. It's another to be like, oh, now there's there's a stroller with me or someone
Right,
or
right.
yeah, a baby strapped. And you're like, all of a sudden you realize how fast those cars are coming.
Yeah, yeah.
But so I think the niche, not only of that you were talking about, that you talk about of like families and kids and urbanism, but also to your point about you're from Richmond and talking about these issues. Like there's a lot of places in this country that have great like urban and walkable areas that are and lots of folks advocating for them that aren't the big places that aren't San Francisco and Miami and New York. But anyway, so can you? I'll stop rambling. Can you tell our listeners about your Substack and kind of what led you maybe to wanting to start that and take the kind of focus that or the niche that you have?
Yeah, so yeah, I was looking to write um something about Richmond and minimalism. That's how Density Dad started. I'm a huge minimalist, and I saw a lot of um, commonality between minimalism and walkable places and
Yeah.
like the built environment. Like if we take these things away and we put these things that really matter, how much better of a built environment we have. And I wanted to like really hone in on that. But I found some like I found it really hard and difficult to talk about that every week,
Yeah.
So I started to zoom out and talk about other cities and what they're doing, and then got to a point where I was like, I'm going through enough to want to share with other people. Like, how do I connect with fathers, but then parents, and honestly, people who have similar experiences to me, but they don't know how to say it.
Mm,
And like if I could package this up in a way where someone could just reshare it or forward it to someone, like how much value that could have. And so last year I launched Density Dad. The name kind of came from, wanting to lower the temperature around the word density.
mm.
I've attended enough public meetings to know like when that word comes out,
Yep.
like the room just completely changes.
Yep. Yep.
And so like whenever I say, oh, I have a Substack and it's called Density Dad, like people always like chuckle or like, oh, that's cute, or like, that's awesome. That's a dope name or whatever. And that's what I wanted. I
Yeah.
wanted it
Yeah.
to not be like honed in on the word density, but just the two, because, I share about like all forms of density. I don't just talk about higher density. I talk about like what low density can do too, right? Like
Hmm.
why scale matters, and why you can go into a mill town and go downtown and you're like, oh, this is awesome, and they're just like 2-story buildings, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
um writing this newsletter has helped me understand that it's not just a United States or North America thing. Like
Mm,
there's people all over the world who wants to explore, placemaking and how to navigate the built environment in a way that it's safe for everybody.
hmm.
And I wanted to reduce it to a place where it was digestible, like for anyone. Like it was just something that was really palatable, and like you didn't have to overthink. You can know nothing about policy and read one of my like
Yeah.
pieces and like feel included. And that's what I want. Um there's gonna be some grammatical errors. I just talk like I'm talking to anyone else.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people can appreciate. And um the Richmond part isn't as it's not there as much anymore because it's like bigger than Richmond. Some of the pieces that I really enjoy doing, I have a small town lovin's
Yeah.
section, as I call it, and I just talk about small towns. Like the things we could learn from them. I have a dad in the details where I just talk about like some of the difficult pieces of being a dad and working in this space.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, just like wanting to highlight the good, the bad, and the things that could be worked on, and make it in a way that it's shareable and like people can like figure out how to make it be an impact.
yeah. And was the small town loving section where you talked about Danville? I think I saw that article.
Yes,
Yeah, it's like,
Danville's
the,
awesome. If you
yeah.
haven't been to Danville, go immediately. Like seriously.
We talked to some folks from there for an episode earlier or late last year on kind of their policing, but and the way they've brought down kind of crime in the community. But
Oh
it's really
yeah,
cool to think about, like there are places that are like Danville that are small and you still have those kind of like urban amenities
yeah.
and walkable environment. It doesn't need to exist in just bigger places.
Absolutely. Yeah. I to walk around downtown Danville and have one thing in my mind, but actually be there in person, I was like, wow, like,
Yeah.
a big gap between those two things. And it's only going to get better.
Hmm.
So I really think they're doing some great work out there.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of what you talked about is like just would resonate. I think with anyone interested in urbanism. I'm curious, was there a moment where you're like, "This is why I need to talk about the dad side of this"? Was there, or maybe it was just
Yes.
like having your first kid that did it? But
No, it was so like having my first kid was like a big part of it,
mhm.
but it was also like dads have like a part of parenting that I think that mm, kind of, I don't want to say gets overlooked, but
Mm.
it's just stress that we don't think about until we're in the moment. Like I will never forget driving home for the first time.
Yeah,
They told my wife, "Yep, no driving," and so I'm like, "Great!" Like this wasn't part of like like I knew I had to drive home, but it's very different when you got behind that wheel and you like realize that the world is very different as soon as you pulled out of the deck of the
yep,
hospital,
yep.
right? And the thing about us, we were living 45 minutes north of Charlotte at the time. So I was like, and I had to go on the highway. So
Yeah.
it's
Oh yeah.
like, cool. I'm just going to take the toll road the entire time, right? Like I just prepared myself for that, but that doesn't make it better because you just have people who speed in the toll road, right? Like, um, and I felt that anxiety the entire time, or um, being without a car,
Hmm.
realizing that like society has this view of how we have to have a car, because like what if something happens, like that's something I get all the time,
Hmm.
like, well, what if something happens, like how are you going to get to your kid, or how are you gonna, and it's like, well, do you know how many people walk around New York City without a car every day, and they still have emergencies that they have to deal with, like life
Yeah.
goes on, like you figure out how to do it, whether you take a taxi or you hop on a bus or you take the next train, or you it's not like I'm going to keep this car for an emergency,
Hmm.
and so like being able to talk about like, yeah, you can do this, like it's
Yeah.
possible, we live, I mean, I could walk to a hospital,
Yeah.
that's, so to be able to and my wife still has a car and we'll talk about that later, but like I just wanted to share like, leading and being a being a dad that just kind of goes against the grain in some departments, but like I'm still a awesome dad for it,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know really how else to explain it, or when I took the bus with my daughter, it's like, you did what, like, but
Yeah.
this is what moms do every day, like that, and it's just like to hear the first thing I heard when I got on that bus was, I just love seeing dads and, their daughters together. And I was like, yeah, like I want to set that example that this happens, we're able to do that, So yeah, I just wanted to share a perspective of fatherhood that was still urbanism, but it's like a kind of against the grain, because like you think of the dad with the cool car or the truck or the
Yeah.
SUV or whatever, and it's
Yeah.
like, no, I have a Brompton, like, like, and we're figuring out how to get my daughter around, but like, yeah, I don't have this big trophy that I'm like hanging around, like
Yeah.
I just want to be a cool dad.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and to your point, like the stories we tell about dads aren't dads that like walk with their kids places. It's yeah, the SUV, the truck, or the, you're not biking with your kids necessarily. Like that's, but that, but if you're a person that, is now a dad that is interested in those things or wants to live like that, like there's not a lot of examples out there. So I think that was again part of I think what resonated with me seeing your work. Is like because that's how I want to like live and with my daughter as well. Is like I'd love to be able to strap her onto an e-bike and
Yeah.
go to daycare, whatever it is. So
Yeah, there's a part of it too, like, dad's supposed to be the protector. Like, if something
mhm.
breaks, like, you're supposed to be there. Like, and so, like, I'm out of my element
Yeah,
because, like, oh, I have a flat tire. I have to learn on my bike. I mean, I'm
yeah,
still learning some of those same elements. I'm still out and about with my daughter, and I don't have um I have a backpack.
yeah.
Whatever's in this backpack is what I
That's
have,
all I got.
like,
Yeah,
yeah, so it's like, but it's okay. Like, that's the point I wanna, like,
yeah,
really drill into people. It's like, I'm not, like, carrying a car around with all these things just in case something happens, It's like, I have my bag, and that's, we'll make it work,
yeah. That's enough. Yeah. Well, you mentioned taking your daughter on the bus for the first time. That was one of my favorite of your articles that I kind of perused. But can you talk about kind of that experience and then how you wrote about it? I think there was an aspect of like at first like just hey, this is what it's like to do this with a kid. But then there was also a little bit of like, hey, these policy things are having an impact on the experience of parents,
Yes.
taking the bus. So yeah,
Yes.
just yeah. Can you talk maybe about that article?
Um, for one, I just wanna shout out, like, all the single moms or
Yeah,
just moms that do this all the time, and I don't want this to come off like this has never been done by parents,
yeah,
but
yeah.
particularly because, like, I don't have a car, it was so important for me for that my daughter to see this other aspect of, um, society,
Hmm.
because there's so many stigmas associated with the bus. And I take the bus every day to work. Currently, our bus is free here in Richmond until June 2025. So it's like I can chance it. I can try this out. And if it doesn't work, we can figure something else out. But like, you know, costs me nothing right now,
Yeah.
right? So that was one aspect. The other thing is we have a great BRT system. So it's like, okay, cool. I can like map a whole day out. Like my wife went and got her nails done, and I was like, cool. After coffee, it's just me and you. Like we're
Yeah.
gonna go hang out. And
Cool.
but I realized the complexities of um things like frequency, right? Like
Yeah.
a BRT system that runs every 30 minutes or so on the weekend, just pretty, it isn't fast, right? It could be faster. It should be maybe 15 minutes, but I
Mhm.
mean, 30 minutes is tough. And particularly when it's hot and, thankfully there was shelter and things like that. But um, when I got on the bus, the driver said, you're gonna have to fold that up, right? You're gonna have to take her out
Yeah.
and fold that up. And I was like, huh? Like, and this wasn't on a BRT bus per se. This was on just your, local line.
Yep.
So I was like, all right. So like I pull her out and I'm holding her with one hand and I'm folding it up.
Folded
And
the
then I'm
stroller
like,
up. Yeah.
yeah, like so I'm like holding it up with my feet and I'm holding her in the other hand. And like the whole thing that's going through my head is I'm like, there's parents who do this every day. So we're
Yeah.
just gonna have to figure this out. Like this is but I documented everything. I wanted to talk about it because one of the things I advocate for being on, one of the boards I serve on is just, articulated buses, like longer buses, like
Mm.
less seating, like spaces for strollers, like how there has to be a way that this accommodates parents.
Yeah.
Um, and even getting off was difficult, right? Because I had to unfold it while I'm holding her and put her back in and then like, you know, get off the bus without like knocking anybody on that's trying to get off who's trying to
Yeah.
get on the bus, right?
Hmm.
So it's just a difficult transition. And then I guess they're not asked to put the thing down where you can roll down. So that's again something I have to navigate. That's just something that you're like, wow, are there no parents in the planning process of this that
Yeah.
thought about this? And then when we got to the museum, I wanted to talk about that experience because like we had this new park, and the irony is like we have these like immature trees, which
Mm.
eventually they're gonna have great shade. But it's like we had no temporary shading. And so just talking about like this experience from start to finish, it's like there's so many things that like my daughter didn't sign up for any of that. Right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
she's just with daddy, right?
Yeah.
But it's like I can speak up for those things and just bring them to someone's attention because they're necessary. Like she can't say it for herself, like I'm hot or like the sun's in my face or I'm
Mm.
getting a nice tan. Like how strollers are designed. They're they're not
Yeah.
necessarily designed for that. So yeah, it's just I wanted to document everything from start to finish from a parental, way, and I think it really, like you said, resonated with a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, I think there's two pieces of that I wanted to highlight. Where there's some of our regular policies around like transportation, where the infrequent service, that like 30-minute increment versus 15. That's inconvenient for anybody, but it's even more inconvenient when you're having to wait with a 1.5-year-old, right, in the sun. And then the like
Yeah.
specific policies, like the
Yep.
stroller thing, that are like that's hurting a parent more than it would like someone that might have a bike where they need to store it maybe differently, right? And so it's
Yeah. Yeah.
it's having that parental perspective, or thinking about like thinking about are you being inclusive for everyone when you're trying to design these policies or this service. Anyway, I just thought about how it wasn't just that like it was inconvenient. It was that it's particularly inconvenient when you're a parent and you're looking around a 1.5-year-old like you were.
Yeah, and one of the things that I expressed recently in regards to this was like, um, yes, like everyone needs shade.
Mm.
Yes, everyone needs probably more space on the bus or anything that I talk about that would make it easier for parents. It's going to naturally
Yeah,
be
be better for
easier for
everybody.
anyone.
Yeah.
But I think what becomes somewhat of an issue is like I don't want to say I'm attacked sometimes, but it's like, well, what makes it so special about parents? But I think people forget the element of like the communication from child to parent.
Mm.
Like I could never be in my child's car seat. I don't know how comfortable it is, right? Like, or I
Hmm.
can never be in her stroller. I can't tell her what the or she can't tell me what the sidewalks feel like, that are cracked and trees coming up through them and that sort of thing, right? And so it's like this missing element as adults is like easy for us to complain and be like, yeah, like everyone needs that, but it's like literally we have, our children who can't necessarily speak about those
Yeah.
things and tell us like how uncomfortable they are. And then the only way they do know how to tell us that they're uncomfortable is like 1,000, right? Just crying.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like,
Right? They're crying and you're, out in public and you're without a car and
yeah.
there's no shelter, right?
Yeah.
It's just you in that moment, out in the open trying to unfortunately reason with your child about something that you unfortunately know
Yep.
is uncomfortable for them, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the element that people just have to keep in mind, and that's why I feel it's so important to write from this perspective, to speak from
Hmm.
this perspective, but also get policy like really in place to help with it from this perspective.
Yeah. Well, and it's a great point that, making it more convenient for kids and parents makes it more convenient and a better experience for anyone that's using a service,
Yeah.
like transportation. But also, like, I do think, like, if you want to make a thriving, neighborhood and community, you want to have, families and people that want to, like, don't want to just leave after they have their first kid or whatever.
Yes.
And you want to have that, like, dynamism of, like, folks of many different generations kind of running around next to each other. And so, but if you have public policies and things like parks with no shade, where it's inconvenient to have children in that place, like, then you're not going to have as robust or as thriving of a place as you would otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's unfortunately it's a double-edged sword where it's like, well, we built the playground.
Yeah.
Why isn't no one using it?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we checked the box. It's hot. Like my
Yeah.
my daughter literally cannot swing on that.
Yeah.
There's no tree canopy or any artificial shading and then it's like, well, we'll just build less of it since no one's using
Yeah.
it.
No one's
And
using
it's
it. Yeah.
not that no one's using it. It's just like it's not pro- it's, it's not safe. It's not
Yeah.
it's not something that, would make sense to use. And it's not just with like playgrounds, it's with parks and green spaces too, right? Where
Yep.
it's the same thing. It's like, well, we built this brand new park. And I wrote about that in a, 5 things missing in the built
Yeah.
environment
Yeah.
for families with young children. And um Greenville's a great city. Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Like was so close to moving there. And
Some
I
beautiful
speak about
parks
that.
too. Yeah.
Beautiful parks, Reedy Creek is amazing. Um, but for a brand new park to not have any artificial shading was like, wow,
Yeah.
and then I kept seeing it being repeated where it's like the renderings look great, but the renderings are 25 to 30 years out where
Yeah.
the trees are mature and, everyone's walking and, jogging and whatever. But it's like right now, our children need
Yeah.
more than that. And it's like if we're allocating our dollars from a policy perspective, those are things that have to be, taken into account. And the thing that I keep wondering is, you know, every parent can't be a planner, but there's
Mm.
certainly planners that are parents.
Yeah.
And I can't figure out how there's a disconnect for some of those things. Like,
Yeah.
you clock off, you clock out at 5 o'clock, you go home to your kids, and I'm sure everyone has to use the built environment one way or another, but it never dawns on, it seems like on certain planners to
Mm.
get these things immediately done instead of thinking just for the long term,
Yeah.
because by the time your kid's 25 years old,
Yeah.
you know, and for the immediate, it just was unsolved.
Yeah. No, and that's a really great point. And you mentioned your street swag article, which I wanted to talk about too. Like, what were some of those other things, those 5 things that you that you highlighted as, like, hey, these are things that are missing that would make a place more convenient for families with young children.
Yeah. So another thing was public restrooms.
Yep.
I remember when going to Denver, how like readily available public restrooms were, and I just thought that was um, great from a perspective of like availability, but then the way that I saw it used, like it was used in near parks, it was used like on a regular street, like almost like a telephone booth. It was
Mhm.
just there. Um, I also um, what else? Give me a moment. like trying to rattle off the
No, you're
other
good. Yeah.
things. Um,
Well, I know
yeah,
one
so
of them was
shade,
yeah,
public,
shade.
yeah,
Yeah.
public restrooms, pedestrianized streets. I
Yeah.
remember was a thing. After visiting Charlottesville, Virginia, they have like an
Their pedestrian
awesome like
mall. Yeah. Yeah.
downtown mall, and but even then they have like cars that cross at certain points, and I was like, I
Mhm.
guess they had to if they retrofitted this area. Um, but it's still nice to walk around and like know that if my child did any unexpected darts, that I'd be
Yeah.
okay. I'd
Yeah.
be able to jog her down. Um, Small concept like drugstores and bodegas was another one. There's been times like we just need something small and we're
Mhm.
out in the park, we're having a good time, and it's like nothing nearby because it's illegal to build it.
Yep.
So it's
Yeah.
like, oh, I just need like I need fruit. I need like diapers or, like just the knickknacks you would see in a bodega or a drugstore, and it's like I can't get it. So like I have to pack up the whole experience and go do that thing
Yeah.
because again, it's like the only way for our children to communicate at this young age is like crying, and it's like you just want to do the thing as fast as possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, I was in Wilmington, I saw like their Dollar General Express, and I was like, oh, this is like the perfect size for like urban
Yeah.
spaces. But again, we that's a policy thing. We have to figure out like how to make that legal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, and then like again that spacious public transit. I have a Brompton. I take my bus. I'm taking my bike on the bus, and it's still it feels like I'm taking up space, even though it's like super tiny. And it's just
Yeah.
because I think we've of course you want seating for people, but I think we also need to do a better job at looking at like where the peak times are. Like
Mm.
by the time I get off the bus, it's like four of us left on the bus. So it's
Yeah.
like how many people are taking it one and two and two stops or
Yeah.
three stops, and they don't necessarily need a seat. When I was in New York, a lot of people stand.
Yeah.
you know, some people prefer to stand; they don't want to sit down. But it's like you kind of don't have the option in these smaller public transit options. So those are like the five things, and it caught a lot of attention, I think,
Yeah.
from parents like, yes, yes,
Yeah.
someone's speaking for us. And I'm just thankful we got picked up.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, like these aren't like huge things. It's like, hey, you need more density and rail and like some like huge investments. They're like small things like shade and like maybe unlock the park bathroom after hours and like
Yes,
and
like I thought they were
yeah,
just super creative. Like the
yeah,
public restroom in Denver was like, we're gonna keep the door open and we're gonna put up a shower curtain. And I was
yeah,
like, that's it. Like that's
yeah,
all that needs to be done. And it's a big sign that says like, don't close this and it'll be locked after these hours. And I was like, that's more than what some cities do, right?
yeah,
Greenville was another great example. Again, when you go down on the trails and like you're in there downtown, they have public restrooms. And what I thought was cool is it's like on the back of like restaurants. So it's like
yeah.
almost like shareable from both perspectives. And I was like, that's great. Like, simplify it.
Yeah. Well, and those are all great examples of places that are doing it right, right? Like it's not like out of the realm of possibility that like you can't think of places that are doing this, but there are places that are getting it right and making it more convenient for families and for folks with
Absolutely.
young kids. Yeah. Very cool. And then another one of your street blog articles was about kind of apartments in walkable neighborhoods, and this was one I hadn't thought a ton about until I read it. Um, and I think it's anyway. I'll let you kind of explain it, but I think it's an interesting. I think it's interesting in that like cities often tell themselves or talk about creating urban and walkable areas as a way to attract young professionals, but it doesn't take much
Yep.
much change in policy to also attract families or retain families. So, can you maybe talk a little bit about kind of the trends you're seeing with housing around walkable areas?
Absolutely. So this was another piece I wrote from personal experience. It was
Yeah.
coming from a place of like, okay, like my daughter will be 2 in January, and we're looking at each other like, so now what?
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, what does family planning look like? But also keeping in mind that the housing crisis is, still looming. It's still here. And there's really no sign of it getting better immediately, at least. And so it was like, okay, if we like look for a 3-bedroom apartment, it's going to be, at least $2,000, like 1,800 to $2,000. And we're like, that's unrealistic
Yeah.
for what we know we can maybe get for a house. But then it's like the inventory for the housing is so, low,
Mm.
um, that it puts us at a disadvantage when, going up against um, either young professionals who are moving from these larger cities with these bigger salaries. It's just made it more complex. And, to give background there, we're a one income family. We're able to make it work due to just me not having a vehicle.
Mm.
Um, my wife was a nanny for 10 years, so it just made so much more sense to pay the expert in
Yeah.
the house than
Yeah.
to try to bring someone in the house who wasn't necessarily like as great as the one, the nanny I know my wife to be. So,
Yeah.
um, it's almost like when, you're not a graphic designer and try to do your own logo, instead of just paying someone who's the expert. So yeah, I mean, we just applied that simple math there and was like, okay, yeah, this makes sense for us. But now we're like kind of stuck due to that, right?
Mm.
Because everyone's it's assumed that everyone's like a two income household.
Yeah.
Um, so we started to like look into a lot of the newer developments because they offer a lot of deals. Like, first year is like cheaper than normal, but then we started to see like developments that didn't even offer a 3-bedroom.
Yeah.
Um, I've seen developments that don't even offer a 2-bedroom. They just offer like studio 1-bedrooms. And these are in like, our walkable neighborhoods, our warehouse districts. And started to do research and find that this is actually pretty common,
Yeah.
to not see 3 bedrooms. And if you do, there were luxury 3 bedrooms. It's like, not something that like a starting family could really like get in and appreciate, without having to like, even if you got in, like the rental increases for the next year would
Yeah.
be the one to break the camel's back, right? So
Yeah.
it's like I started to see this trend, but then I started like even looking into amenities and seeing like how families are being erased
Mm.
from the built environment in these like new entertainment districts, these new brewery districts, these mixed developments that have the renderings of children in them, but then the apartment complexes literally don't have playgrounds anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, they don't have like kiddie pools. They have different amenities. I mean, a few I mentioned in the article is like I've been in tours where they have like vinyl listening rooms and
Yeah.
they have gift wrapping stations and pet
Dog
salons
washing.
and
Yeah.
yeah, it's like cool, but like what about a kids play area indoors in the
Yeah.
main hall? And that's like not a thing. It's like it's like saying no without saying no,
Yeah.
and like we're thankful to live in a very kid friendly complex now. Like there's 2 and 3 bedrooms only, so there's no 1 bedrooms in our complex. So
Oh
that's
wow.
like
Yeah.
awesome. Because like when we brought our daughter, who was really young, and she's crying throughout the middle of the night, I didn't feel bad because
Yeah.
it was like rotation. Like upstairs, their kid was crying. It's
Yeah.
like you just get used to it. But then my daughter gets to see other kids in around, and I think that goes for something. And I just wanted to write my personal experience, and I started to see like other people going through the same thing. And unfortunately, what a lot of people say is like, oh, just look in the suburbs.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
has to be something
Yeah.
out there. And I'm like, I don't think the complexities of like being car free in the suburbs like is really grasped. I
Mm-hmm.
think
Mm-hmm.
to be like really um that notion of like, oh, like families should only be out there, it's like that we have to like look past that. I think we were like
Yeah.
should be moving past it, even though like some counties and suburbs are doing some great like mixed use development type things. Unfortunately they're also going at a much higher price point, right?
Yeah.
Because those developments are kind of targeted towards like the luxury family that can
Mhm.
afford that. So yeah, it's like, where do you go, in that point, and do you just put off your plans of growing as a family, or do you like just give it a risk? Like, it's just a really complex position to be in, and I just felt like it should be talked about more,
Yeah.
from a parent's perspective.
Yeah. Well, and then it becomes self-reinforcing, right? If the narrative is, people with families don't live in downtown areas, and then that means that the developers don't, or and apartment complexes don't have, families or apartments for families.
Yes, and
So it's
I've
like,
even heard that, like, there's some counties that, like, have potentially, like, outlawed some 3 bedrooms due to, like, some, regulations and policy. I've seen where, it's obviously cheaper to get a 3 bedroom if it's aged, right? With, like, my
mm,
complex was built in '89, so, like,
mhm.
of course, like, it's more attainable, right? But due to the lack of, like, competition, it's like they can go up on our rent, and we
Yeah.
don't really have another option. So it's
Yeah.
like it's twofold. It's like, yes, build more housing, but like also build more types of housing in
Hmm.
more
Hmm.
areas. And like put the policy in place. Like, yes, this has to have 3 bedrooms. And I talked about
Yeah.
incentivizing like 3 bedroom units just like you would a historical tax credit, right?
Hmm.
Or how you would incentivize tax abatement, right? Like
Hmm.
those different things to incentivize a builder to build a affordable 3 bedroom instead
Yeah.
of just using the 2 bedroom as their market standard and working from there. Um, and I think the other piece of like the 3 bedroom part was um, the schools, and
Mm.
I really want to like hone in on that because I've gotten comments of people saying like, well, there's better schools in the suburbs anyway. Like, why would you want to live in the city? And again, this goes back to that notion of like, we should be changing that
Yeah.
narrative
Exactly. Yep.
of like the schools in the city just, are, testing horribly and, X, Y, and Z. And so I think that, when you account for like gentrification and you account for like displacement and all these things that are happening in the city, um, if we want everyone to have accessibility to good schools, right? But it's like if the neighborhoods with the good schools in the walkable areas are pricey and then the suburbs with the good schools are pricey, it's like, where does your just middle of the road family go?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. No. Yeah. And I think it's a really great point to think about it as one of the other in one of the other like policy areas that local governments can incentivize developers to make is like, hey, if you create family friendly type of, units in your complex, you can get a density bonus, just like you would if you would do affordable housing or
Absolutely.
green policies or whatever. So I think adding that to kind of the portfolio of things, so like, hey, this is another kind of housing that we want to see built, and like adding that to the the portfolio. I think that makes a ton of sense. And like some of the policy things you identified are like, that makes a ton of sense for cities to think about it. And again, it's like it's a small thing, right? In terms of like, you're already doing some of this, like incentivizing. Just add this, family lens to it of like, we also want to create places for families in our downtown.
Absolutely. And I think if we really want to go for, you see it everywhere. It's like live, play,
Yeah,
work.
yeah, yeah.
We want that environment. It's like you want families in that environment. Cause I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what I put in that piece originally, but I ended up taking it out was like, you know, whether, whether you're a parent or not, one day, someone's child's gonna make a decision for us.
Mm-hmm.
All of us,
Mm-hmm.
and we want to ensure that they have the most access to be able to make decisions not based upon biases, but like on the different um, experiences that they were able to have during their childhood, right? Like, if you've only seen the suburbs, how can you make a rational decision about like what city
Yeah,
density or like, you know, walkable places look like, and um, there's enough, you know, division between the two to not. extend that, but like
Mm,
actually promote like that intersection more where it's like, okay, like if a child was exposed to walkable places and they were exposed to like, rural, like just that's why I'm writing from all these
mm,
perspectives so that
mhm.
parents can see these cool rural towns and go visit them.
Yeah, yeah,
Jump on Amtrak or, you know, if you have a car, drive to it. I want more exposure for these parents so that it trickles down to the children so that the leaders of tomorrow have better um data, I guess you can
yeah,
say, to
yeah.
to make proper decisions when we're too old to make them for ourselves, or we're just simply not in that position of power.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, well said, well said. All right, so I didn't have this on our question list, but as I'm a new dad. So what advice do you have for new parents that want to like you know still do their walking about and taking transit and biking with the
Yeah.
kids? Like what lessons
I
learned do you
think
have? Or
yeah, I think balance
Mm,
is important and do what like feels comfortable for you. Like I know car light is a term that's used a lot. I don't consider myself car light because my decision to be car free wasn't my wife's decision. So it's not like our car. Like she's not comfortable biking and taking
mhm,
public transit. So like I need to ensure like the car is like always available for her.
mhm.
And I just ask like, hey, like the timelines for this thing doesn't make sense. Is it okay if I use the car? Right. Or the Uber from this place is going to cost me like $40, or there won't be an Uber by the time I finish this
Yeah.
thing on a Tuesday night. Like, is it
Mhm.
okay if I use the car? And like, you're a team, right? Like, she's gonna be okay with that. But it's like to go car free and just expect your loved one to be okay with it is like a bad move. So just understand that there has to be proper communication. That's one big one. Um, don't just dive into it when you think of like being without, because you're going to get shell shocked a little bit the first time you're out with your kid and you do not have your car. Like you
Yeah.
just can't go home
Yeah, yeah.
immediately. Don't panic. Just ensure you have the basics, like good diaper bag, filled with the goodies and music and a charger, or battery pack for your phone. Like you can do this, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Another thing is surround yourself around other parents, whatever you do. So like our venture was to the Children's Museum. So the good thing is like if you're without something, like there's tons of parents here, right? Like, oh, I
Yeah.
forgot the wipes. Well, you're around a bunch of parents. I'm sure someone can let you use some wipes, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But it gives you an opportunity like to build a community too. Like
Mm,
we did a cargo bike meetup and there were other families there, and like I met
awesome.
people there who was like now like are part of my community. Like we
Yeah.
get up for dinner and like we talk urbanism and all that good stuff. But it's like you can find people who are on this journey with you. You don't have to be by yourself.
Mm,
Their son is like I think 3 or 4 months younger than my daughter, so it's like kind of perfect, for that type
yeah.
of thing. So yeah, just you know, don't just dive in, like ease into it before
Yeah.
you go on a venture to the zoo by yourself, by
Yeah.
public transit,
Yeah.
and
And you're stranded. Yeah.
yeah, you're stranded. That's one thing. Have proper expectations.
Mhm.
Your child's gonna be shocked. Like, she said bus and she recognized what it was, but like not seeing mommy around and us just hanging out,
Yeah.
was different for her. But then also again, like the public transit has all walks of life. So, the gentleman I shared a conversation with had just got out of prison for,
Yeah. Yeah.
X amount of years. And he wanted to have a conversation about like how excited he was to, finally see his kids and, like just
Yeah.
be open and like understand that this is why you signed up to do this and
Yeah.
not be in a vehicle, to be present and to experience the moment, but then also set that expectation for your child that it's okay to be around other people
Yeah. Yeah.
and not have your headphones in, but just be present in the moment. So those are some of the big things. Buffer your time. Everything's going to be longer. Everything
Yeah.
is going to take way longer than you think it will be.
Yeah.
I can't stress that enough. Like you're like, oh, it's going to take me 2 hours. No, it's going to take you 3.5.
Yeah.
Just go ahead and
It's
put
all
that
day.
in
Just
there.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, extra change of clothes, like, just the stuff that
Yeah.
you think about, and lean on text tech if you need to. Like, me and my wife share locations. We've
Yeah.
been doing that since day one. It's always been just important. Um, and check-ins and texts and all that good stuff. But those are like the top things. Oh, the biggest one. Work around their nap schedule.
You have an app
Just
schedule?
make your life easier.
Yeah.
If your child goes to bed every day at 11:30, don't leave the house at 11 o'clock
Yeah.
thinking, oh, they'll just sleep in the car, and didn't know.
No, they
Let
won't.
them
Yeah.
take their nap. When they wake up naturally, go ahead and, explore the world. But
Yeah.
don't think that the car nap is the same as, like, a good nap in their crib or their bed. So, yeah. Sorry, I
Yeah.
gave out way more
That was good.
tips than
Those seem
probably
like hard-won
necessary.
lessons. Like,
Yeah, just do better than I did.
yeah. Awesome. No, that's great advice. I love it. So, as we kind of wrap up here, what's next? What are you working on that our listeners should look out for? Or, we'll obviously link to your Substack. So maybe if there's something that you got planned that we can send them towards. What are you working on?
Absolutely. So, Substack is my primary focus. I'm working the kinks out of my portfolio site. So, if you're looking for a speaker, mentor in the urbanism environment, if you got pieces or assignments you'd like for me to write, then you can contact me on the portfolio website. It's just density.dad. I know it's like different from like .com, but just want to put that out there, density.dad, for the website. And I'm hoping to be more like on YouTube and my podcast more often. I do have some features coming up that I'm pretty excited about on some different podcasts.
Cool.
But yeah, I'll be writing, and hoping to connect with more folks on this very topic. And I can't wait to see the niche grow, to see
Yeah.
more parents like talking about this. So I think that's like the biggest priority for me right now, is just continue to bring visibility to this sector of urbanism,
Yeah.
and just seeing it continue to grow, and again be impactful in the rooms that matter.
Yeah.
Letting people know like how to be involved with their public meetings and stuff like that. So look out for like more articles like that, like how to have the parent life balance and still get into a public meeting, that sort of thing.
Still
like,
be involved. Yeah.
yeah, still be involved. Just try to share those insights more than just like policy, or anything like that.
Very cool. Awesome. That's awesome. All right, and then we have a traditional last question on the podcast. If you could be the Gov Love DJ and pick the exit music for this episode, what song would you pick?
Tom Misch, Follow would probably be my record. Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Our producer will get that queued up. And that ends our episode today. Barry, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me. This was really fun. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Absolutely, Ben. Thank you for having me.
Cool. And for our listeners, we'll link to, like I said, Barry's Substack, and then some of the articles that we mentioned today in the show notes for this. So definitely check it out and give them a follow. And for our listeners, GovLove is brought to you by engaging local government leaders. The best way to support this podcast is to become an ELGO member. You reach us online at elgo.org/GovLove. And we're also on, what is now X, what was Twitter, at GovLove Podcast. And you can subscribe to GovLove on your favorite podcast app. And if you're already subscribed, go tell a friend or colleague about this podcast. Help us spread the word that GovLove is the go-to place for local government stories. And with that, thank you for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government.
Mama, maybe you should take the first step, and the rest will follow.